Good afternoon. It's a solemn privilege to be here. I take this as one of the foremost things that I have done in my life. I have always been on the side of justice. I have always been on the side of the underprivileged. I have always been on the side of kids who didn't have a chance. And today I find myself here on the side of a couple of cops that did more for my family than anyone else in this whole country. When I began to look after foster children, I did so because I had always wanted a big family. I had given birth to 4 children, and that was going to be the end of the biological part of my family. And when unfortunate things happened and I found myself divorced, I remember standing at my kitchen sink, heartbroken. And I said, okay, God, what's for me now? I did not want to be one of the casualties that go from marriage to marriage. I wanted my life to count for something. And I left that prayer at that point. It was about 2 weeks later that a boy was left on my doorstep. Devon, that Candace talked about. He was brought by his Aboriginal father. His mother was an alcoholic. She had taken Devon out of the hospital. He was premature, he wasn't even supposed to be born yet. Put him in a club bag and taken him to the Albany Hotel and proceeded to get drunk. This is just how my life works, and I don't want to give you a whole big long story, but I want you to understand. I was selling real estate at the time. I've done a lot of different jobs in my life, but I was selling real estate at the time, and a lady had given me a lead, and I had sold a house. So I took a bouquet of roses to her place of work, which happened to be the office of an Aboriginal workshop where guys were learning how to do carpentry work. As I went into the shop, the guys there was 12 of them, they were all coming out to have coffee. And so I was introduced. Okay, so then I left. The next morning, I'm all ready to go to work. My youngest was 12 at the time. Just ready to go out the door, and an old rattle-trap car drove up, and a man got out. I thought he was drunk, but I realized afterwards he was crying. It was one of the men that I had met at the workshop. And he said, "Are you Shirley?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "My boss told me that you've raised kids and you're a good mom." I said, "I try to be." He said, "I want you to raise my son." He told me that social services was going to take the son away because the wife couldn't handle him, because she was drinking. And he said, "I can't quit my job," but he said, "I want him to have a good home." He gave me one of the most precious gifts I ever had. A few years later, he had 2 brothers. The mom phoned me one day and said, "Did you know I have 2 more boys?" And I said, "No, I didn't." She said, "Well, one's only 3 days old. The other one's 5. You can have I'll use her words, "You can have the little bastards if you want them. If you don't, I'm dropping them off the bridge." And I said, "Please, you've been drinking. Why don't you just think about what you're saying. And she said, I asked you, do you want them or not? And I said, well, bring them over for a week. Get yourself straightened around. And she did. 20 minutes later, she was at my door. This would be the second child. Well, he was 5 then, and the baby was 3 days old. And the second child, I came down my steps out of my house to meet her, and he was probably this high, and he looked up at me, and he said, are you going to be my mommy? And I said, we'll see. And he hugged my legs, and he said, I love you. I fell in love that day. I knew that there'd probably be problems ahead. All 3 of those boys, and I adopted after that, but that'd be 7, 8 of my children are fetal alcoholic. Some of them came through social services, most of them just came. And that began a time of my life when I needed help. And these became kids that needed the help of the police, they needed the help of social services, they needed the help of a loving parent, and not very many people understood. I use Devin as an example because today Devin is just about 10 years sober, and it's because of a cop that he's sober. That was the beginning. I ran a restaurant across from St. Paul's Hospital called Mama's Restaurant, and the people that came to my restaurant were odds and ends of society, let's say that. Everybody else was scared to come there because it was in the hood. One of the best things that ever happened was when Brad and Larry were assigned to that area, and Ernie Ludet. I love Ernie Ludet. My boys were in trouble a lot. They weren't out destroying people, they were out destroying themselves. Alcohol and drugs. Devin got into crystal meth, threatened my life. One of those boys, the only one of the 16 that still has trouble, is now 36 years old, and he's still bothered by crystal meth. And I've been able to, I love the cops, because I can't stand up against somebody that's 6'1", but I can say, you know, guys, this is the rules, and the cops will help me. I have never had a fight with my boys, and that's a big problem we make, but I'm not preaching to you today. But I learned that I had to have a backbone, I had to say things as it was, and I had to call the cops if necessary. Larry became the cop that I called often. I remember, and I'm telling these stories because I know Devin was supposed to be here to speak, and he'd tell you about some of it. Some of it he doesn't even remember. I remember calling Larry one time. I was working at the restaurant late. The 2 other boys had gone home, and when they got there, Devin was in the house, lights were out, he had a candle burning in his bedroom, he had stolen 2 propane tanks from the neighbors, and he was huffing propane. Now there's nothing more dangerous than propane within 6 feet of where you've got a candle burning. I was short-staffed at the restaurant, and so I did what I always did. I called Larry. Larry and Brad came. I left the restaurant. I met them at home. And Larry walked into the house and he said, "Devin, what's going on?" And Devin, he was in his bliss world or whatever you want to call it. And so he said, "Look, you're endangering the lives of your mom and your brothers." Devin started swearing at him. Devin started kicking at him. If you met Devin today, you'd never even think that the kid would lift a hand to anybody, but that was what he did. And Larry said, "All right," put the cuffs on him. And he said, "I'm taking you down to the cells for the night." And then I said, "Devin, I love you. I'll talk to you in the morning." And he wouldn't answer. And Larry said, "Tell your mother that you'll be okay and you'll see her in the morning." And he told Larry where he could go with his suggestions. Larry put his arm around him and he said, "Son, you've got to realize that you're loved and nobody wants to see you go through this." Do I want to see justice for Larry? You bet I do. I have said to Candace, I don't care if it's my last breath. Cancer kind of came in and stopped me. But you know what? I'm in treatment and I'm getting back to my feisty self. And so help me if there's anything that I can do. I've got suggestions, but I'm not going to bring those up right now. But that's not the only story about Larry and Brad. When I had the restaurant, one day I looked out the window, and if you drive past St. Paul's, they now have it as it's an MRI area and so on, but it was a huge restaurant. And I looked out the window, and here's kids coming from all directions with chains, boards with nails in them. So I did what I always did. I phoned and personalized a cop. And Brad and Larry were there in minutes. And I saw them walk into the midst of all this melee. Each one grabbed a guy by the arm, told the rest to go home, brought them into the restaurant, bought them a coffee, bought them a burger, sat and talked to them for about an hour and a half. They shook hands and left. That to me is a cop doing his job and doing it right. I saw him so often pick up kids off the street and come in and buy them a pop. I was close to St. Mary's School, and there was a lot of the kids there that didn't eat before they went to school, and it was before the lunch program. And so we'd make a great big pot of porridge in the morning, and then I'd give them porridge and an orange. When Larry found out about that, he gave me money to help towards that. You know, we have stood by and watched two men's lives be ruined and said absolutely nothing till Candace wrote her book. And somewhere, some way, we have to get the courage to have a backbone and speak out. There's no reason why this has to go on and never come to an end. So I'm meaning it when I say, I don't care if it's my last breath, but I want something done. And I am willing to put myself right in the middle of the fray. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you, Candace.